The incident at the grocery store was the talk of the neighborhood for days. Social media had its share of exaggerated accounts, but one thing was clear: Snoop Dogg's composed response had struck a chord far beyond the walls of that store. Back at home, Snoop sat in his cozy living room, surrounded by his family and closest friends. They were decompressing from the day, but Snoop's mind was elsewhere. The confrontation with Mrs. Thompson played on a loop in his head. "What's on your mind, big homie?" asked Leroy, his longtime friend and confidant. Snoop exhaled deeply, leaning back into the couch. "Man, I wasn't even mad at her," he said, his tone reflective. "I just kept thinking about how someone gets to that place thinking like that, living like that. You feel me?" Leroy nodded. "Sometimes, people just don't know better. But what you did back there, bro, that was different. You planted something in her and everyone else who heard you." Snoop shook his head slowly. "I hope so. But planting seeds ain't enough. You gotta water 'em too." Mrs. Thompson's reflection. Meanwhile, Mrs. Thompson sat alone in her dimly lit dining room, her unfinished cup of tea growing cold. Her grandchildren's photo sat on the table before her, their innocent smiles now a painful reminder of what she had said. For the first time, she wondered what they would think if they had seen her earlier that day. Would they be proud? The thought gnawed at her. The next morning, Mrs. Thompson pulled out her dusty landline phone and dialed her daughter, Eleanor. "Sweetheart," she said hesitantly, "can you bring the kids over this weekend? I'd like to talk to them." Eleanor paused, surprised by the uncharacteristic request. "Of course, Mom. Are you okay?" "I think it's time we talked about a few things," Mrs. Thompson replied, her voice tinged with regret. A community response. Back in the neighborhood, the story continued to ripple through the community. The cashier, Ava, couldn't stop replaying the incident in her head. Snoop's calm yet powerful words had lit a spark in her. The following week, she proposed a new initiative at the store, a monthly community dialogue where people from all walks of life could come together and discuss issues that mattered to them. She pitched the idea to her manager, who was initially hesitant but eventually agreed after hearing the overwhelming support from staff and customers. The first session was scheduled for the next Saturday in the parking lot. Snoop heard about the event through his barber, Marcus, and decided to make an appearance. "If they're starting something real, I gotta show love," he said with a smile. The dialogue begins. On a breezy Saturday morning, folding chairs were arranged in a circle near the store entrance. A modest crowd of about 20 people gathered, including Ava, Marcus, and a few others who had witnessed the incident. To everyone's surprise, Mrs. Thompson arrived, clutching a small notebook. When Snoop walked in, the murmurs grew louder. He greeted everyone warmly before taking a seat near the center. Ava opened the discussion with a brief introduction, thanking everyone for coming. "This isn't about pointing fingers," she said. "It's about learning, growing, and finding ways to be better for ourselves and for each other." Mrs. Thompson cleared her throat, drawing all eyes to her. She stood up slowly, her hands trembling slightly. "I'd like to start, if that's all right," she said. The group nodded encouragingly, though some were visibly skeptical. "I've lived a long life," Mrs. Thompson began, her voice shaky but sincere. "And I'll admit, I've held onto a lot of bitterness and ignorance. What I said the other day, it was wrong. No excuses. I've been thinking about it ever since." She turned to Snoop, who looked at her with a calm expression. "Mr. Dogg," she continued, her voice soft, "I'm sorry. I can't undo what I said, but I want you to know that I'm trying to do better." The crowd sat in stunned silence. Snoop leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers. "Ma'am," he said, his voice kind, "it takes courage to say that." "Thank you." A new chapter. The dialogue lasted for hours, filled with heartfelt stories, difficult conversations, and moments of shared understanding. People left with a renewed sense of community and purpose. Snoop's words from that day became a mantra for the neighborhood: "Ignorance doesn't get better in silence." Over time, the grocery store incident became more than just a viral story, it became a turning point. Mrs. Thompson became a regular at the monthly dialogues, often bringing baked goods to share. Ava's initiative grew, attracting people from neighboring areas. As for Snoop, he continued to be a pillar of the community, using his platform to amplify messages of unity and resilience. One day, during an interview, he was asked about the grocery store encounter. "It wasn't about me," he said simply. "It was about us, all of us. If we're gonna grow as a society, we gotta start watering the seeds we plant." And with that, the ripple of change continued to spread, one conversation at a time.